the youngest serial killers in history. You won't believe who's number 5 on this list. It's a shocking case that left even the most seasoned investigators speechless. When we think of serial killers, our minds often go to older individuals, people hardened by life and years of crime. But some of the most disturbing cases in criminal history involve children and teenagers. It's shocking to imagine that someone so young could commit murder, let alone multiple murders. Yet the stories of young serial killers throughout history prove that age is not always an indicator of innocence. From a 7-year-old boy in India to a case of 2 preteens who committed a crime that shocked the world, these stories of youthful killers will leave you questioning what drives someone so young to commit such horrific acts. You won't believe who's number 5 on this list, an unforgettable case that stunned even the most experienced investigators. 1. Amarjit Sada, the world's youngest serial killer. Amarjit Sada holds the title of the world's youngest known serial killer. Born in 1998 in the small village of Mushahar, Bihar, India, Sada's life took a dark turn at an age when most children are playing with toys. At just 7 years old, Sada committed his first murder, followed by 2 more over the course of a year. His victims included his own baby sister, a cousin, and another infant from a neighboring family. What makes this case particularly chilling is not just Sada's age, but the fact that he showed no remorse for his actions. When the police arrested him, he confessed to the murders with a calm and almost detached attitude. According to reports, Sada killed the children by taking them into a field and striking them with bricks. In a society where childhood is often equated with innocence, this case stood out for its sheer brutality and the child perpetrator's lack of emotional response. Indian law does not allow for the criminal prosecution of children as young as Sada, so he was placed in a rehabilitation center rather than a prison. The case sparked debates about how to handle young children who commit such grave crimes. Can someone so young fully comprehend the consequences of their actions, or are they simply products of their environment in desperate need of intervention and treatment? 2. Mary Bell, the 10-year-old schoolgirl killer. In 1968, the United Kingdom was shocked by the case of Mary Bell, a 10-year-old girl from Newcastle who killed 2 young boys. Mary's first victim was 4-year-old Martin Brown, whom she strangled to death. Not long after, she killed 3-year-old Brian Howe in a similar fashion. But what makes Mary's case even more disturbing is her behavior after the murders. She was found to have returned to the scene of the crimes and even taunted the families of her victims. Mary's childhood was filled with trauma and abuse. Her mother was a violent sex worker who allegedly subjected her daughter to years of physical and emotional abuse. This troubled upbringing left Mary emotionally disconnected and incapable of forming healthy relationships. After her arrest, she was found guilty of manslaughter rather than murder, as the court determined she had diminished responsibility due to her age and psychological state. Sentenced to a secure children's home, Mary Bell was released at the age of 23 and given a new identity. Her case has sparked ongoing debates about juvenile offenders and whether young children who commit such crimes can ever be fully rehabilitated. While Mary has reportedly stayed out of trouble since her release, her name remains infamous in British criminal history, a reminder of the complexity of childhood violence. 3. Jesse Pomeroy, the Boston Boy Fiend. Jesse Pomeroy earned the nickname the Boston Boy Fiend for his violent crimes, which began when he was just 12 years old. Growing up in the late 1800s in Massachusetts, Pomeroy had a difficult childhood and was known to torture and mutilate other children. His violent streak eventually escalated to murder. At the age of 14, Pomeroy killed 2 young children, a 10-year-old girl named Katie Curran and a 4-year-old boy named Horace Millen. Pomeroy's brutality shocked the city of Boston. His victims were lured to secluded areas where he would subject them to horrifying acts of violence. He was eventually arrested after Katie Curran's body was found in the basement of his mother's dress shop. Pomeroy confessed to the murders without showing any signs of remorse. Due to his age, Pomeroy was spared the death penalty and instead sentenced to life in solitary confinement. He spent more than 50 years in isolation, a fate that mirrored the fear and anger his crimes had generated in the public. His case is still studied today as an early example of juvenile psychopathy, raising questions about the roots of violence in children and whether young offenders can ever be truly rehabilitated. 4. John Venables and Robert Thompson, the James Bulger case. One of the most infamous cases in modern British history is the murder of 2-year-old James Bulger in 1993. What shocked the world even more than the crime itself was the fact that James's killers, John Venables and Robert Thompson, were both only 10 years old. The two boys abducted James from a shopping mall in Liverpool, leading him away from his mother in a moment of distraction. Over the course of several hours, Venables and Thompson subjected James to horrific abuse, eventually leaving his body on a railway track in an attempt to cover up their crime. The image of James being led away by the two boys was captured on CCTV, and it became one of the most haunting images associated with child crime. Their trial captivated the nation and sparked a fierce debate about how to handle young murderers. Both boys were sentenced to juvenile detention, and they were released at age 18 with new identities to protect them from public retribution. Venables, however, would later be arrested again for possessing child pornography, reigniting public outrage and raising concerns about whether he had been successfully rehabilitated. The James Bulger case remains one of the most emotionally charged and debated criminal cases in the UK, and it has left a lasting mark on the way juvenile offenders are treated in the country. 5. Eric Smith, the freckle-faced killer. You're not going to believe who's number 5, a case so shocking it left the world speechless. In 1993, 13-year-old Eric Smith committed one of the most chilling murders in modern U.S. history. Smith lured 4-year-old Derek Roby into a wooded area while the young boy was on his way to a summer camp in New York. Once alone, Smith attacked Derek, strangling him and beating him to death with a rock. Smith's appearance, a freckle-faced boy with glasses, made it difficult for many to believe that he was capable of such a brutal act. But his confession left no doubt. He told investigators that he had been overcome with anger and frustration, stemming from years of bullying and emotional neglect. Smith's case quickly gained national attention due to the contrast between his youthful, innocent appearance and the horrific nature of his crime. During his trial, Smith's defense argued that he suffered from mental health issues, but he was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Over the years, Smith has applied for parole several times, with some arguing that his age at the time of the crime should be taken into account. However, Derek Roby's family has consistently opposed his release, and Smith remains in prison. Eric Smith's story is a prime example of how young offenders can shock the world with their capacity for violence, even when they appear to be ordinary kids. It raises important questions about the role of mental health in youth violence and whether someone who commits such a crime at such a young age can ever be rehabilitated. 6. Craig Price, the Warwick slasher. In 1987, 13-year-old Craig Price committed his first murder, stabbing a neighbor to death in Warwick, Rhode Island. Over the next 2 years, he would go on to kill 3 more people, including a mother and her 2 daughters. Known as the Warwick slasher, Price's crimes were particularly brutal, and his arrest at age 15 sent shockwaves through the small community. What makes Craig Price's case even more alarming is his complete lack of remorse. When police arrested him, he not only admitted to the murders but bragged about them, showing no signs of guilt or empathy. His violent behavior didn't stop with his arrest. Even while incarcerated, Price continued to exhibit violent tendencies, attacking guards and other inmates. Due to Rhode Island's juvenile justice laws at the time, Price could not be held in prison beyond the age of 21, regardless of the severity of his crimes. This sparked a major legal debate, and eventually led to changes in the state's laws regarding juvenile offenders. Price remains in prison today, with his continued violent behavior making it clear that he poses a danger to society. Price's case highlights the challenges of dealing with violent juveniles who show no signs of rehabilitation. It also raises the question of whether some young offenders are beyond help and must be kept in prison to protect the public. Understanding youth serial killers. The existence of young serial killers forces society to confront some uncomfortable truths. What drives a child or teenager to commit such extreme acts of violence? While each case is unique, several recurring factors can be seen across these stories. One common thread is a history of abuse and neglect. Many young killers come from homes where they have been subjected to physical, emotional, or even sexual abuse. In such environments, children may become desensitized to violence, viewing it as a way to assert control over their own lives. Mary Bell, for instance, suffered severe abuse at the hands of her mother, and Eric Smith was relentlessly bullied by his peers. The trauma these children experienced may have played a role in shaping their violent behavior. Mental illness is another factor that often plays a role in these cases. Some young killers are diagnosed with severe psychological disorders, such as conduct disorder or psychopathy, which can prevent them from feeling empathy or understanding the consequences of their actions. Jesse Pomeroy's extreme cruelty toward his victims, for example, may have been a result of underlying psychopathy. Finally, social isolation is a recurring theme in many of these cases. Children who are ostracized by their peers or neglected by their families may feel disconnected from society, leading them to act out violently. Eric Smith's feelings of anger and frustration over being bullied likely contributed to his decision to kill Derek Roby. Can young serial killers be rehabilitated? One of the most controversial questions surrounding young serial killers is whether they can be rehabilitated. Juvenile justice systems around the world often emphasize rehabilitation over punishment, especially for young offenders. However, the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs varies, and not all young killers can be successfully reintegrated into society. In cases like Mary Bell, who was released after serving time in a secure facility and has since lived a quiet life under a new identity, rehabilitation seems to have worked. However, in other cases, such as John Venables, who was later convicted of possessing child pornography, the success of rehabilitation is less clear. For some young offenders, particularly those who show no remorse or empathy for their victims, rehabilitation may not be possible. Craig Price, for instance, has shown no signs of reform, and his continued violent behavior suggests that he may never be able to safely rejoin society. The stories of the youngest serial killers in history are shocking and unsettling. They challenge our perceptions of childhood innocence and force us to grapple with the complexities of juvenile crime. While some young offenders may be capable of reform, others remain a danger to society long after their initial crimes. Ultimately, these cases highlight the importance of early intervention, mental health treatment, and support for at-risk children. Whether or not young serial killers can be rehabilitated, understanding the causes of their behavior is crucial for preventing future tragedies.